Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. We are back for the end of the month reckoning, where we can balance the books that I actually read against the books that I felt in all of my hubris that I would actually finish in the month of March. But it was a good reading month overall. I am excited to talk about some of the things that I have read. I have some new releases, some books that have been on the TBR for a long time, and I will break it down as I have in the previous months. So in terms of star ratings for the month of March, I had 1 5-star book, 2 4.5-star books, 2 4-star books, and 3 3-star books. So there was some variation, and obviously more 3-star books than 5 stars. But I have to say that I was very satisfied with this reading month overall. I think that there was a lot of variety in the types of books that I read. I read some novellas, I read some manga, I read some huge chunky novels that have been on the list for a really long time. And even the 3 stars, they were still things that I enjoyed reading. I'm just going to break them down in the order I read them because I have my trusty reading journal back with me, and I have decided for all of these wrap-ups, I'm just reading out of the journal. I'm not forcing myself to remember any of this information because then I won't forget it, and I think that that is fine. So we'll just start with the books, and then I'll talk a little bit more about the month at large at the end of the video. The very first book that I read for the month was a novella called All the Horses of Iceland by, I think it's Sarah Tolmie is her name. And this was one of the books that I had on my most anticipated list of 2022. It's a novella that is it's almost magical realism. It has that very whimsical feeling of fantasy set in our modern world, not our modern world, but in our world. And it just follows the story of how the Icelandic horses came to be in Iceland. And it is at once a story about the journey to find yourself. It has part of a ghost story. And like I said, it's just this very lyrical, magical tale of magical realism. It's quite short. I think it's around 100 pages. I read it with a bunch of people on Discord, and almost everyone finished it in a sitting or 2 sittings. I think it was received in different ways by different people. I think some people had an idea about what they thought it might be, and it did not live up to those expectations. But for anyone who has been considering reading it, I will tell you to go in thinking this. It is a story that is told to be a fable or a fairy tale. It has a very zoomed out approach, I guess. Like, we're not going to zoom in on any particular characters. Don't expect a lot of exploration or depth. This is very much about, it's just a haunting fairy tale. And in 100 pages, I think with her use of language and the way that her writing can immerse you in the story, Sarah Tolmie does a great job of making you feel like you are living out this story alongside the main character. But it doesn't it doesn't give a lot in terms of depth of the story because it is so short. I think that the author accomplished exactly what she set out to do. And if you need something short that is going to feel like a departure from the things that you usually read, you want something to break up bigger books, I think that it is very much worthwhile. I liked it enough that I now want to go on and try some of her other novellas. This was one of the 3-star reads for me just because it's difficult for a novella to earn 5 stars for me. It's difficult for a novella to live up to full-length novels because the things that I like about reading, it takes time to explore those. But just for the beauty of the writing here and the enjoyment that I had as I sat down, I gave it the 3 stars. I don't know how long it will stick with me, which is why it got 3 instead of 4 or 4.5, but if you're someone who likes beautiful writing for beautiful writing's sake, I would absolutely recommend that you check this one out. The second book that I read for the month was the second volume of 20th Century Boys. So Patrick and I have gotten together. We have done a recording about the first arc of this manga. It's a series that we were reading at the same time and discussing. And I think Alan is going to hop in with us as well because he has caught up, and actually he has surpassed me. So he's further along than I am, and he's going to join in on the discussion moving forward. But this is a kind of sci-fi thriller mystery manga that has excellent storytelling, excellent characterization. It is a very easy first manga to get into. I'm not going to talk a lot about it because I am doing those full discussions over on Petrick's channel. And if you are interested in getting started with manga, or if you really love this series and you just want to hear some people talk about it, then I will direct you over there so you can check that out. But this volume 2 got 4 stars from me. I really liked it. This story is totally sucking me in, and I cannot wait to continue on with it. The third book was my 5-star read for the month of March, and that was Skin Game. I did a full reading vlog for Skin Game, so if you are a Dresden fan and you want to see spoiler content for the series, I poured all of my emotions out in that reading vlog. Skin Game was a very emotional Dresden book for me. A lot of it was emotional highs. Actually, there was a lot of happy tears, or at least a lot of happy tearing up during Skin Game. There was a lot of stuff that was happening. It felt a little bit like a throwback to the beginning of the series because it did feel more like a case book than some of the last few have. It had fewer of those overarching plot threads that have woven the last few books together and had a very separate mystery, but we do find out some information that will further the series as a whole. I think it was a nice throwback to the early beginnings of the series, but has continued that same quality in terms of character development and writing style that has evolved with Jim Butcher over the course of the series. I really loved it. It definitely ranks amongst my highest Dresden books. I don't know, Cold Days was such a high for me. I really, really loved Cold Days. I don't know how I would rank the two of them side by side, but this one was wonderful. I cannot wait to read the rest of the series. And also, I don't want to read the rest of the series because I don't have anything left to read. And I guess I didn't record this in my book, but I have also been reading through the short stories. So I won't go through those individually, but I have been given a list of the ones that I must read before Peace Talks and Battleground, and I have been reading those, and then I'll go back and read the rest of them after I get through the next 2 novels. But never fear, I am reading the short stories prior to finishing the last 2 books. Book number 4 for the month was another 4-star, and that was the 3rd Perfect Edition volume for 20th Century Boys. So same thing, really loving that series. We'll be chatting about it with Petrick. So glad that I am picking it up and super excited to continue on with that. Book number 5 was one that I did a full spoiler discussion with Jake and Jimmy and Alan about, and that is The Emperor's Blades by Brian Staveley. So if you want to hear all of my thoughts and the thoughts of those other wonderful booktubers, then you can check out that live discussion. But for the sake of this wrap up, I will say I gave this 3 stars. I probably could have given it 2.5. And I wanted to give it 5. Like when I started the book, given the premise, given the cool cover, given that opening section, the prologue, I thought this is going to be amazing. And I think that there were some really strong plot elements, some imaginative elements, some world building elements that really appealed to me. I wanted to love this book so much. I just did not like the execution. I thought that while most of the writing was pretty serviceable, there were some really clunky phrasing. There was some really clunky phrasing. There were some lines that were repeated ad nauseum. How many more times could I read that women cannot sit on the unhewn throne? Like, I know, we know. And just some of the narrative choices. So I think we got some really basic tropes that I enjoy. I don't think that's a bad thing. We got some basic tropes that I like in fantasy, some really cool twists in terms of world building, and then just execution-wise, it fell a bit flat for me. And I honestly, and we talked about this in the live show, a lot of the decisions seemed like they could have been improved upon in editing. So I understand that this was Staveley's debut novel, and this is why I have chosen to continue on with the series. I'm hoping that maybe it will draw me in as it goes along, and I definitely want to check out the second series because I know Petrick has raved about it. People love it, and it wasn't hard to get through. It was just frustrating at places. So if you haven't picked it up, or if you've been wondering about picking it up, it is not necessarily, unfortunately, a series that I would bump to the top of my TBR, but I think it's going to be a fine, like, classic fantasy series to read through, and I'm really hopeful that it will be worth it when I get to the newer books that he is putting out. Book number 6. This was one that I really loved, and if not for Skin Game, probably would have been my favorite book of the month, and that is Guns of the Dawn by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This is a book that I would have never read if not for Alan. It has tropes that I don't usually like. I'm not a big fan of Flintlock fantasy, which is what this book is. But Alan sold it so well when he reviewed it. I think it was last year he reviewed it, and it just made me want to pick it up. So this was our channel buddy read. A bunch of us read through it, and I think for the most part, almost everybody liked it. A couple of people DNF'd because they found the beginning to be slow, which I agree with. But the basic setup is that there's a world in turmoil. And kind of in a flip from the typical, we have the independent state infiltrating the monarchy and trying to stage a coup, take over the monarchy, so that they are the kind of aggressor in this conflict when we enter into the story. And we follow a young woman whose name is Emily Marshwick. She is a young noblewoman in a noble family, and her brother and her brother-in-law have been conscripted. I think they both volunteered to join the war effort. And then as the war drags out long past the point where everybody thought it would be over, women get conscripted into the army. So Emily herself has to go forward and fight for her family as the representative for her family. And we follow Emily's journey as she becomes a soldier, and we watch what happens. She goes into the marshes to fight, and Adrian Tchaikovsky has such a command of landscape and such a command of setting that you feel like you are in these hot, oppressive marshes. His character work is excellent. Emily is a wonderful main character. And unlike Children of Time, which I read last year, that had a broad cast of characters and things felt a little less personal, this is a very personal story. You get to know Emily very well, her hopes, her dreams, her fears, the people she clashes with, the people she loves, and I really love it. To me, this was a Regency romance or an Austen-esque novel. Like, you are bridging the classics, the romantic classics, with low fantasy. And it is low fantasy. There's very little fantasy. There is some fire magic. So there are wizards that are part of the army, but they're scattered. We don't see them often, but it does exist. Magic does exist in the world. And it's a wonderful story. It does have a slow beginning. So I agree with the people who DNF this at the beginning of the read along. It does take a little while to get set up, but I think a lot of that is just helping us to understand Emily as a character. And I like reading classics. I don't mind that slow build up, that slow character exploration, so it really appealed to me. I ended up giving this 4.5 stars. I absolutely loved it. I will buy a copy. I had this one from the library, and I will definitely buy a copy because I can see sometime down the line wanting to reread it. But I absolutely give this my stamp of approval. If Alan has not convinced you, I can only assume it's because you have not seen his review, but you should go out and read this book. Book number 7, another book that I loved, and again, like one of my favorites of the month. The highs were really high this month. This was another one of my 4.5 star books, and it is 11/22/63 by Stephen King. I did a full, dedicated, non-spoiler review for this one, and I just want to say that I really enjoyed it. It is not my favorite novel by King. I know for some people this is what they consider to be his best book. It is not that for me, but I did really like it. It's a time travel story about a high school teacher who goes back in time to try to prevent the assassination of JFK. That's essentially the setup. But in true King fashion, there's a lot of slice of life moments. We follow our character for quite a long time as he is settling into his life, trying to figure out what exactly it is that he wants to do. Is he going to follow through with this plan? And it's all very charming. I think that King nails that time period really well. There's a lot of nostalgia for a world that has moved on, but also there is a frank admission of the downfalls of the time, of the things that have actually gotten better in the intervening years. And I think that King balances that sense of nostalgia with an appreciation for what we have accomplished in the modern world. So that was a nice balance to see, and I enjoyed that aspect of it. But as with all things King, at least in my opinion, you get excellent character development here. I think the pacing is really well done. I know some people don't love, there's a section in the middle that does feel more slice of life. It takes kind of a meandering path, as King can sometimes. I thought that stuff was really compelling, and I still wanted to read on. This, to me, was an 850-page book that read like a 400-page book. I was just flipping through. really happy that I finally picked it up. This was one of my highest priority King reads, and I'm so glad that I got to it because I really, really liked it. So if you are at all interested, then feel free to go and check out my spoiler-free review on that one. And the very last book of the month was a book that I read with my daughter called A Wolf Called Wander. I have to, in Newfoundland, it's really hard not to say woof. Wolf. A wolf. A Wolf Called Wander is about I can't even say it. It's about a wolf who gets lost. It's based on a true story from a tagged canine that was found in the wild who had made this epic journey across America. And scientists had tagged this wolf and followed him as he made his way across the country. And this author turned it into a story for kids. I picked it up because I thought it might be this generation's White Fang. That is a book that I was obsessed with when I was little, and I wanted to get something for my daughter and my son, but he's very particular about what he likes to read, and so he kind of flitted in and out of this story, but she really liked it. For me, I don't think it reached the same highs as Jack London, which, Jack London is a classic or a classic author of children's lit, but for me, it felt more like a scientific exploration almost. It is a really fun, immersive story, and I really like, so the author does this thing, the whole story takes place from the wolf's perspective. So we're inside his head, we're seeing what he sees, how he interprets the world. And so he will look at the pavement, for example, and talk about the Black River. And so Juliet had a lot of fun trying to decipher what it was that he was seeing and what he was talking about. And I think that sort of explanation really fosters empathy in little kids. It really fosters that shifting of perspective and allowing them to see something from somebody else's point of view. So it was a valuable story in that way. The wolf is separated from his family, so it can be sad. It was really funny because I asked her how many stars she wanted to give the book, and she said 2, which surprised me because I explained to her, I used the Goodreads term of this was bad, okay, good, whatever. And she said 2 because the wolf does get separated from his family at the beginning of the story, and she was like, that was just so sad. Why did a sad thing like that have to happen? But I do think she genuinely enjoyed it all the way through. But if you do have kids who are sensitive to those kinds of events, just be known that there is a familial separation at the beginning of the book. This was a 3-star read for me. I do enjoy middle grade, but in terms of the middle grade that I have read, this is kind of middle of the road for me. I do love a good animal story, and there's some really cool resources at the back of the book with websites, links to national park services, those kinds of things. If you have a kid who is interested in animals and wants to learn more about the real life applications or the science behind these kinds of stories, which I really appreciated. We did check out some of that stuff, and it was really cool. And it's always just fun to read the books together. So overall, it was a good experience. I still think we're going to try White Fang sometime soon, and I still think that is the story that I prefer out of them all. But those are all of the books that I read for the month of March. This was a little bit of a lighter month reading wise. There was only 8 books and a couple of them were manga, but it has been a really busy month. As a couple of people have already announced, we are organizing a charity Jeopardy event that is going to happen next weekend. And so I have been putting a lot of time into getting ready for that, organizing some things, writing the questions, that type of stuff. So I am still happy that I got to read so many books that I enjoyed, and I am okay with the slower pace for this month. In terms of my reading goals, which I always discuss at the end of the month, one of my goals was to have 50% of the books I read come from my own personal physical TBR, and I'm failing in all months. So I did read 2 books that I had previously owned, this being prior to 2022. 2 of 8 is not 50%, but it's not 0. So I'm only hoping to improve that in the future. Unfortunately, I also bypassed nonfiction and literary fiction this month, but I am soon entering into a phase of my reading life where I don't have as many buddy reads, so I can hopefully put some new books or some different books on the TBR at that time. And then the last one was ongoing series. And obviously I continued on with the Dresden Files with book number 15 this month. In other news, I have not been watching a whole lot. I did start the web series, The Untamed, which is on Netflix and is simultaneously like one of the most ridiculous things I've ever seen in terms of effects and setup and acting and everything. But it is based on a book that I read earlier this year called Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation. And that book was a web novel originally, so I have read the web novel, and now I am reading the books as they are released in print form. And it's just a story that sucks you in. So I've read the web novel, and I'm reading the published ones, and now I'm watching the Untamed, and there's also an animated version, which I have started to watch. So it's slowly taking over all areas of my life, but I am really enjoying it. It is a really fun fandom to be a part of, so that has been a very enjoyable part of the month. Other than that, I haven't been watching a whole lot of anime. I gave Jujutsu Kaisen a try, and I only watched the first 3 episodes, but I wasn't really pulled in by it, so I am going to give it another shot. Both my sister and Patrick recently watched the movie that was released, and they both loved it. So I will give the show a try at a later time. But I would love to know from everybody else what you read in March, what you watched in March, what you're looking forward to reading in the next month. And I will see you with another video soon. Bye!